Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. For those of you that like to get to the juicy story where you have the straightforward Bigfoot encounter, well, I've got that for you on this channel right now. But the full stories are really worth listening to, and I've got them listed at the bottom, because really, just the Bigfoot encounter without the whole experience from the beginning to the middle and the end is really worth listening to. But if you just want to get to the juicy encounter that people have sent in to me, by all means, here are a few examples of them right now on my channel. So get straight into the business, shall we? And let's get started. I remember creeping very cautiously into the woods, making sure that I was not disturbing any leaf litter or twigs under my feet, so as to avoid drawing unwanted attention to myself. I crept behind a tall red cedar tree, where I hid covertly, watching the hunters. I heard them talking together about a particular deer that they wanted to take down, so I was momently reassured that they were not after any of my squirrels, and that was a huge relief to me as far as I was concerned. "You're a dreadful shot," I heard one of the men say. "You miss every time. That deer's long gone now. We'll have to come back next time, but I'll be the one shooting, you hear me?" "I'm not a bad shot," chided the other man. "I just missed, that's all. It can happen to anyone." He sounded extremely annoyed. "No, you're a bad shot," insisted the other man. "You're just not a natural hunter like I am. I would have taken that thing down in a second. The trouble with you is you're not coordinated enough, and your fingers wobble on the trigger, and you shake." "We'll see about that," said the other man again, sounding equally more annoyed. "You'll be eating your words. I'm not as clumsy as you're making me out to be." I could hear these men were having a major disagreement together about their hunting prowess, or lack of it, so to speak. I did feel angry that these men were illegally poaching and had the audacity and nerve to hunt on my grandfather's property, especially as it was not even hunting season. I suddenly recognised one of the men as a farmhand my grandfather had once hired a year earlier to help around the farm. I imagined he knew my grandfather's woods pretty well, which was the reason why he was probably poaching here in the first place, as he understood the layout of the land, and he knew we had some extensively hefty deer population that found refuge and sanctuary and safety in our woods because they were never really hunted. As I pondered all these thoughts in my mind, suddenly I heard a very heavy, thunderous sound coming through the woods, and it sounded like something stupendous was coming towards us, but it sounded distinctly bipedal. The only problem was that a human being could not make such a monstrously huge commotion as this thing was, and this thing was on 2 feet. Whatever this thing was, it was spectacularly heavy, and it sounded like a herd of rhinos that was racing through the woods at an alarming momentum. The two men became very startled, and I could tell by their wide eyes and open jaws that hung to the ground that they were utterly terrified. One of the men said, "What the heck was that? Did you hear it?" The other man was shaking so much, all he could say was, "It's coming, it's coming." Then out of the shadows I suddenly saw this massive creature rising from the undergrowth on 2 huge muscular legs. The creature was unlike anything I've ever seen or witnessed in my entire life. I was young at the time, so was not good at estimating sizes, but I will say that this thing was colossal. Looking back, he could easily have been over 1,000 pounds, 5 foot wide and 10 foot tall. He was covered from head to toe with brown hair that in certain beams of sunlight I noticed had a very distinctive auburn hue. I do recall the hair was long, distinctly human-like, and very glossy and shiny. I remember thinking how pretty the colour actually was. The creature was mammoth, monster if I ever saw one. He was an apex predator, equally on par with a lion or rhino, and possibly more so. He was powerful, athletic, excessively muscular, agile and majestic, and he had a very distinct ape-like appearance, especially noticeable with the heavy shoulders that sported a cone-shaped head. He had nut-brown eyes, set in long brown leathery skin, with a prominent furrowed brow ridge, very flat nose, and a very visible pink nostrils and human-like slender mouth. I also noticed that the creature had a very overlong pair of arms that hung below his knees, and I'm willing to bet that he could touch his toes without bending over.
The creature was absolutely incensed with these two men, and they were trying to shoot at the creature in fear, running backwards in the process, too terrified to turn around, in case the hairy humanoid pounced on them in surprise. Shooting at the creature was a monumental mistake on their parts, and it only served to escalate the creature's rage. He let out a thunderous roar and shrieked so loudly that the sound went right through me. He sounded exactly like a woman being murdered when he made a noise. He lunged towards the men and literally tossed one of the shrieking men in the air like a pizza, but he caught the man in his arms before he actually fell to the ground. I have no way of describing this bizarre event to you, other than it looked like the creature was throwing the man up and down and intentionally catching him every time he descended towards the ground. The man kept screaming, "Help! Help! Help!" while the other man just hightailed it through the forest, and in the distance I could hear him starting up his car engine, stalling several times, and then whizzing away in his car at a lightning speed, leaving his friend alone in the woods to face the full wrath of this ferocious, formidable beast. I remember thinking what a fair-weather man that his friend actually was for running off like that, without actually assisting his mate. Eventually the creature threw the man into the air one more time, and particularly broke his fall midway so as not to kill him, but to cause significant damage and an extensive amount of bruising. Once he'd done this, he made a few angry grunts, and then he just disappeared into the woods on his long, agile legs, leaving the man stranded in the woods, sitting on the ground looking quite dazed, confused and shocked, hardly daring to believe that he had not been killed and had actually escaped with his life. I realised that the injured man was in fact the farmhand that my grandfather had hired last year. I really do not think the creature was intending to kill him, but I think he wanted the men off his land, and that was the distinct impression I got. It was as if he was warning the men off his turf. So to speak, he was giving them a clear warning message: do not come back here again, or I promise you I will not be responsible for what I do next time. That was the kind of message he was giving out. You're probably wondering what my reaction was to this strange creature. Well, it terrified me, to be sure, especially because it was so monstrously huge and powerful, but at the same time I was so stunned by seeing such a peculiar creature in our woods that bore a strong resemblance to an ape, and yet at the same time had a very distinct human-like trait. I truly think I was somewhat strangely bedazzled and in awe of the creature, so much so, in fact, that I believe my terror was marginally suppressed by sheer amazement and awe that this majestic, lofty and powerful creature had aroused within me. I was also amazed by how intelligent this creature actually was. I did ponder as to what the strange creature could actually be, as I'd never heard of such an amazing creature existing in North America before. I watched the man struggling to get up. He was groaning in pain and clutching his leg. He could barely move, so I surreptitiously slipped out of the woods as quietly as I could. I called my grandfather, but I told him I'd seen someone going into the woods, a man, and I didn't want to tell him what I'd seen for fear of being reprimanded for going into the woods myself without being supervised. I knew that if I told him I'd been in the woods, that I'd be grounded and get into trouble. My grandfather muttered something angrily under his breath about poachers, and then got his rifle, escorted by his two devoted Labradors, and proceeded into the woods. A while later he came back, helping our old farmhand into the kitchen, asking him what on earth he had done to himself and why he was in the woods in the first place. "I thought I'd take a shortcut," he lied. "I was coming to see you to see if you had any jobs going, as I'm a bit strapped for cash these days. I was walking and got caught up in some old tree limb and had a bit of a nasty fall." "A bit of a fall?" laughed my grandmother, mopping the man's wounds with her disinfectant. "You look like you've been through a mince grinder. But luckily you'll make a full recovery in a few days, but you will need lots of rest. I can see you've sprained your ankle very badly there." My grandmother insisted that the farmhand stayed in our home until he had been nursed better and had fully recovered, and my grandfather gave him a job around the farm. I was secretly irritated that they were helping out this dishonest farmhand, but I never had the guts to tell my grandparents anything about what I'd seen that day, nor about the strange hairy humanoid that I'd actually encountered.
So there we are. That's the juicy bits of our stories tonight. I personally think you should go back and listen to the whole story because it makes it so much more exciting, because then you learn all about where it happened, the location, and all about the fabulous characters involved in the story. And that makes the story so much more gripping. But as I say so, go down to the description and then click on to the YouTube link, and then you will hear the whole story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.